Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is TB's Guide, and if you follow me around on the internet in general, if you follow me on social media or on any of the other platforms and any of the other projects I do, you might know that I am a comic artist and illustrator and cartoonist and general likes to draw things kind of person, and that is in fact how I make most of my side income. It is the profession to which I aspire. Over the course of my career, I have tried out pretty much every single art application that exists in the world for creating digital art on a computer. I've tried Photoshop, I have tried GIMP, I've tried Paint Tool Sai, I've tried Medibang, I've tried Fire Alpaca, I've tried all of them. And all of them have their advantages and disadvantages, but never have there been a program that actually did the things I wanted out of a program when it comes to making comics. Until I found Clip Studio Paint. Clip Studio Paint was formerly called Manga Studio, which should tell you something about where this program comes from. It is a Japanese-developed program, primarily popular for a long time in Japan with manga artists, and it has an English translation that works perfectly fine. Everything's perfectly translated, but that's where the program comes from, and that's where a lot of its influences are. Now, there are some things that this program can do that other programs just can't. And in this video, I'm going to demonstrate a few of those to you. I should stress, though, that this is not a sponsored video. Smith Micro, who create the program, didn't pay me to make this video about it and talking up all its advantages. I wouldn't mind if they did. I'm always happy to take extra money, but unfortunately, not so much this time. I'm pretty much just talking about it because I think this program is really cool, and it should be talked about more, and I would like more people to know about it. So, the first and most important thing that this program does for a comic artist is this. It creates comic panels with a tool. Now, you might say, big deal, that's just a square with a little black outline. What the hell does that mean? Well, it's a little bit more than that, because when you create a frame with the comic frame tool, you don't just create a black outline that you can draw inside. You also create a layer mask, and a layer mask is... Well, if you're familiar with Photoshop, you're going to know what this is already, but essentially I can demonstrate what a layer mask does by doing this. You can see, so long as I'm drawing inside the panel, on the layers that are inside the panel folder, everything shows up correctly as it should until I try to draw outside the panel. The tool automatically creates a layer mask. That means that anything I draw in here will only ever be inside the panel, and anytime I decide to move the panel, everything inside the panel moves along with it. And if I decide to resize the panel, if I wanted to have a different shape or a different size, I can do that without altering any of the artwork that's inside, which means I can try to crop things, artwork differently, I can try to move things around, and it's all very easy and very convenient, and I'm really quite fond of these functions. And the thing that's so convenient about this is that you can do this in Photoshop. You can create a similar arrangement of panels and frames that works more or less the same way in Photoshop. It's entirely possible to do, but it takes a while. You have to spend some time doing it, figuring out how to make that thing work and setting it all up, but Clip Studio Paint has a tool that is specifically designed to do it all for you. Of course, you can also do stuff like change the size of the panel border if you want a really thick panel border or a really thin one. You can also tell it to just not draw a panel border at all, but it still has the mask on so that it still, you know, limits what you're drawing to inside those little folds. But if you don't want a big black border around it, you can remove the border, you can change the color of the border, you can change the opacity of the border, you can do anything you want with it. Now, another useful function of the frame tool is it makes it a lot easier to do layouts. Now, the way I like to do it, first I'll draw some thumbnails, which is essentially it's a series of just tiny little thumbnail-sized drawings. That's where the word comes from. Just laying out what do I want the action to be, how do I want the comic to look, what do I want to have happen, so I have some sketch or some idea of what my comic page is supposed to look like. Then I'll grab the frame tool, and I'll make one big-ass frame that just fills out the page to the extent that I want to fill it up with panels, and use the Divide Frame Folder tool to start cutting these panels into pieces. To give me panels of whatever type, or whatever size or shape that I need in order to tell the story that I'm interested in, and everything remains nicely proportional across the entire page. That's nice in and of itself, right? But what's even nicer is if I decide that I want to resize a panel, like this panel is too small, I want it to be a bit bigger. Well, I can simply draw on one of these control points, and you can see the entire page around it shifts to accommodate. Now, this tool is not perfect. The logic that underlies it sometimes has a little bit of trouble understanding exactly how to resize panels, but as you can see, for most panel layouts and most configurations, I can resize these panels individually of each other and change the layout and alter the proportionality of the whole thing pretty freely. And without really a lot of hassle underlying the whole process. And that, again, is just a wonderfully convenient set of tools for making comics, which is the thing I'm primarily interested in. And again, you can do similar stuff in Photoshop, you can do similar stuff in a lot of other programs, but you can't do it quite this easily or quite this conveniently. Let's see, yeah, another thing I should stress is that when you create a frame, you get a folder of layers, which means anything you draw that's inside the folder of this layer gets dragged around along with it. And again, that is something you can do in Photoshop, but it's automated here. It just happens automatically, which means you're never going to get stuck accidentally drawing on the wrong layer or drawing in the wrong panel or drawing in the wrong frame, because unless you're drawing on the right layer inside the right frame, the right panel, it's simply not going to show up. So it's just a wonderful little bit of safety feature there that makes it so much easier to manage and to organize your panels and your layers and keep a big and busy comic page organized and keep it steady. You can also create frames with a polyline tool to make it any shape or size that you want. There's also a frame border pen by which you can freehand draw your comic page panels. It's a little unwieldy. I've not really figured out how to do things with it well because you have to do it in one stroke. But if you want to do something that looks like a hand-drawn, kind of scrappy, sketchy comic, this tool is pretty fantastic for that thing specifically. Okay, moving on. The next thing that this program does that I haven't really seen any other program do quite as well is rulers. Now, a ruler in an art program, oh good lord, excuse me, it's pretty much exactly the same as a ruler in the real world. That is to say, you define a line that you want things to follow, and then you can draw on top of that line, and it will follow it perfectly no matter how unsteady your hand is. That is pretty useful. Most programs have these kind of guides. It's not really exceptional. What most programs don't have is stuff like, for instance, the curve ruler, which looks like this, which allows you to define a curve and pretty much drag that curve around as you please, and then very easily follow that curve with whatever tool of choice you would like to follow it. That's pretty cool. Another cool thing. There's also figure rulers, of course, where you can create specific shapes that you want to draw. But much more cool than that is stuff like, for instance, the parallel line ruler, which has an effect whereby once you put down the line and you define a direction, everything you draw everywhere else on the canvas will run parallel to that initial guide, that initial set of lines that you defined, which is very, very useful if you want to do stuff like speed lines or wind effects. That comes across really easily with the parallel line tool. And I found that very useful in a lot of different situations for doing speed lines, for showing a character who's moving along fast. There's also a parallel curve tool, which essentially is the same thing, where no matter where you're drawing on the canvas, it will attempt to follow the curves that you define with the curve tool. As you can see, it is a little bit wonky. Sometimes it goes off on right angles where it's not really supposed to, and you kind of have to mess around with it in order to get something that looks really nice. But if you need to draw a few simple curves that follow each other perfectly, this tool is really quite invaluable for those purposes, as you can see here. Another cool ruler that I use quite a lot is the focus line ruler. You can see a little star shape basically gets popped up here. And what this does is that it creates a vanishing point in the center. And any line I draw anywhere on the canvas, no matter where they are, will be pointing perfectly towards that vanishing point in the center. Which again is brilliant for explosions. If you're drawing explosions and you want them all to look nice, like they're all exploding from the same point, or if you want to do focus lines to draw a character's attention or the reader's attention towards a particular point. But it also has a variation that I have find just extremely cool, which is the focus curve, and it's exactly the same tool, but now instead of being straight lines, you define a curve the same way that you do with the curve tool, but now anywhere you draw on the page, the pen will attempt to mimic that curve as it approaches the vanishing point in the middle. And this is very useful for stuff like magic effects, or something like a psychedelic background, or something to denote, you know, wind, or if you want to draw a tornado, stuff like that. This tool can help you out immensely with that kind of thing. A couple of more fantastic rulers that are here. I use the concentric circle ruler a lot, just because it's useful when you want to just sketch a character's head really quickly. Because you can define it to be a perfect circle if you like, but you can also define it to be a weird, squishy circle. So depending if you have a character with a head that looks weird, or you need a circle of a particular kind, but you are not really sure what size you want it, you put down this thing and you can draw a circle perfectly mimicking the correct shape in any size that you want. Very useful. The same thing goes for the perspective ruler. Now, the perspective ruler is... on the face of it, it's a pretty simple thing. It just creates a perspective. You draw two lines, and wherever they intersect, it creates a vanishing point, and now you have a one-point perspective, which can be very useful for drawing stuff like, for instance, buildings. Makes it pretty easy to just kind of draw out and create... well, in this case, it's a set of boxes, but you can see how this could be the sketch that underlies something like a city scene. For instance, if we draw a lamppost over here and put a door on the building, a few windows, maybe it's a sign, maybe this is the window, and so on and so forth. Very easy to create a one-point perspective, but the real brilliance of this tool is its ability to create multi-point perspective. So for instance, if I wanted to have, say, a bird's eye view of a scene, I could create a two-point perspective, like so. And all of a sudden, I can draw with double vanishing points and create the view of a city from above. Say the road is here. Ta-da! And we've got another building a little closer to the road down here. And there's another thing on top of it, which is maybe, I don't know, some kind of ventilation outlet or something. Who knows what it is? But the point being, you can create multi-point perspectives with this tool, which can be phenomenally useful, especially when you're doing architecture, especially when you're doing different perspectives, weird perspectives, and you need guidelines. You can also do, of course, 3-point perspectives, and you can do 4-point perspectives, and you can do 5-point perspectives, and you can do 6-point perspectives, and I don't really know how to draw in a 6-point perspective, but if you want to play with something like a fisheye lens effect, but you want to draw it yourself rather than apply a photo filter, lots of perspective rulers can help you do that kind of thing. Another cool tool is the symmetrical ruler, which is particularly useful for creating symmetry, as indeed you might have found out. If I draw a symmetrical ruler along the paper like this, then anything I draw to the left side of the ruler will appear also on the right, and anything I draw on the right will appear on the left. And if I cross over, I can do patterns like this very quickly. And this is very useful for stuff like if you want to draw a cool looking fantasy sword of some kind for your heroic barbarian king character in Dungeons and Dragons or whatever. This tool will help you very easily kind of manage to make it look even on both sides if you're looking at it from the front. And it's just fantastically useful. It's also very useful if you want to draw something like, say, a heart or a star or any shape that kind of needs to be consistent across a mirrored axis. This tool is especially useful for that kind of thing. You can also do it to make ribbons or lace, or just to create cool psychedelic patterns, like for instance that. I don't know what you would use that for, but it looks kind of nice, and it's kind of fun to draw. So, those are the rulers. This is something I've not found in any other art program with anything like the same kind of fidelity and the same level of possibilities in terms of how you can use and combine them. Another very useful tool is the saturated lines and the streamline tools. Now, I'm going to create a comic panel here so you can really see exactly how these things work. And I'm going to grab what's called the saturated line. And I'm going to define a little circle here and see what happens. Bam! All of a sudden, the program creates this kind of effect for me. And if I drag this circle around, you can see that the length of the lines changes and the area that it is highlighting changes. But even better than that, I can do stuff like this. Because this is not like copy-pasting a set of lines or a set of effects from an image that you found on Google. This is not like copy-pasting a set of speed lines into your image. I can dynamically change exactly what vanishing points the lines are heading towards, exactly how big of a white gap in the middle that they leave, or how small of a white gap. I can control how big the brush is that draws these lines, which means I can create a bunch of different effects that way. I can change the color of the lines freely to anything I might like. I can make the lines group up in different ways so that they perhaps stick together more. I can tell it to have a greater gap between the lines so that there are fewer of them. I can tell them to have almost no gap, so there is a really thick set of saturation. And there are a few different variations on this same tool. We have this one, which creates more regular, even set of speed lines in this vein, and we have something like the brightness tool, which creates this weird burst, which if you use colors with that, you can create all kinds of lighting effects. With that, there's the burst here as well, which is useful again for stuff like explosions. And then there are the streamlines, which are exactly what they sound like. It's a set of streamlines where I draw a line defining how wide do I want these streamlines to be, and the program will automatically generate a series of long streaming lines for me. Let's see. I need to edit a little bit about this thing because I might as well show you this as well. Any tool that you have in this program, you can edit the parameters of the tool rather dramatically. And you can choose which ones are shown. I'm just going to up the maximum number of lines on this thing a little bit so that it fills out the whole of the space I want it to fill out. Where the heck did that go? There. Fantastic. And again, much like the saturated line tool, I can control the gap between the lines. I can control how thick they are. I can control exactly what angle they're moving at. I can control exactly how much of the panel is covered in them. I can control their exact direction. I can control how far apart they are from each other, how thick the lines are. I can control absolutely everything about them on the fly. And dynamically, which is it's just wonderfully, wonderfully, wonderfully convenient. And if you're into that kind of thing, you can also create your own set of tools. This is one I've downloaded online, which is a rain tool, which essentially creates directional lines of rain for me, which is very useful. It's useful for taking out some of the busy work of creating rain. There are all kinds of other custom tools that you can download in this vein. The screen tones and the FX that this program has are just absolutely fantastic. Screen tones, too, are something that are very useful in creating comics, especially manga is famous for its use of particular screen tones. You might recognize patterns like, for instance, this one I'm showing you right here. And I can edit these screen tones on the fly. I can make them as thick and as dense or as thin and sparse as I want. I can have there be lots of tiny, tiny, tiny dots that essentially just turn into a normal grayscale. Or I can have there be very, very few dots, so every single dot shows up and you get this kind of cool graphic look. I can change the angle that the dots are arranged at. And I can even turn the dots into lines, or lozenges, or squares, or stars, or any kind of other shape. And you can also define your own custom shapes for how you want this thing to look in particular, which is frankly just really very cool. And what's even better about this is that not only can I do screen tones in this program, I can do gradient screen tones. Let me show you what that is. First, I create a gradient with the Manga Gradient tool in this instance, and this is a gradient I can edit. You can see I can make it be a very small gradient with a very sharp line, or I can make it be this very long, drawn-out gradient that slowly becomes darker over time. But the point of this particular tool is that I can apply screen tones to it. Now, I've just applied a circle screen tone to it. You can't see it yet because it's too small, but if I take that down a little bit, all of a sudden you can see what I've just done. Now I've got this wonderful graphic-looking and completely freely controllable screen tone gradient that I can mess around with. And just like screen tones usually, I can turn them into lines, I can turn them into lozenges, I can turn them into cherry flowers, whatever the hell that is supposed to look like. I can turn them into stars. I can do anything I want with this. And it's so fantastically convenient, frankly. It's just so convenient to be able to just use some tools to do these things rather than sitting down and having to do every single thing by hand, which can be so slow and so very, very tedious. So let's take a look at something I mentioned earlier, is that there is a storefront. Now, this storefront has paid materials, paid brushes, paid stuff that you can download for a fee, but much more interestingly, it has a whole crap ton of user-generated content, as we shall see as it loads up. Now, you do need to establish an account with the program. And that doesn't cost you any money. You don't have to sign up for a subscription or anything, but you have to make an account in order to download. And as you can see here, there's a whole bunch of materials available for download. But one of the immediate problems of the program is also made obvious right now. Everything is in Japanese. Like I said, it's a Japanese program. It's made by Japanese developers. It was popular in Japan for a long time. So most of the materials that you're going to find on the website are made by Japanese artists and described in Japanese. So you do have to overcome a little bit of a translation hurdle in order to find exactly what you're looking for. Google Translate can take you some of the way, and the program itself also does come with a few built-in features to help you. But let's take a look at, for instance, this brush. There's a brush here. I can tell from the way it's categorized that this is a popular brush, that a lot of people like it. And most of the people who upload these things will upload some explanatory images showing what the brush is, how it works, what the settings are that they've used to create it. And there is a translation tool, a view translation button up here that will try to translate the text as best possible, which gives you some sense. This is a pencil brush, apparently. It's a pencil writing material, simulates the taste of a real analog painting brush in the draft, can take advantage of when you create. The translation isn't perfect, but I can get the point across. This is a pencil brush tool that I can use to create illustrations that look pretty much like this. You can also find stuff in here like screen tones. You can find stuff like background materials. You can find all kinds of interesting stuff that is very useful. Let's see if I can't find standard materials for manga. Is a set that sort of comes with the program. And you can see all kinds of different things. For instance, there are some pre-rendered backgrounds that you can use, which are free, free for use as a reference material, which can be very useful. Now, some of what's on here is essentially clip art. You have to be aware of that. Some of what's on here is, for instance, stuff like flowers or a brush that draws leaves for you so that you don't have to draw the leaf yourself. And it is up to the individual artist to define quite where they want to draw the line between what is a little bit too much, what feels like cheating, and what you're kind of okay with. This tool, for instance, is for me a little bit too far. I'd rather draw the leaves myself than use a tool to draw the leaves for me, but it's an option that's there if you're really bad at drawing trees and you need a tree scene for your comic. The option is there, and you can use it. There's also stuff like these tools right here, which are cross-hatching tools. Now, much like the leaf brush, these tools will automatically create a series of lines that are scratching over each other, and which you can use to create gradients that look like this, which saves a ton of busy work. And I do believe I actually have a few of those brushes already, so I can show you how they work. They look something like this. I should use the thing I have with pen pressure. They will look something like this, and they will allow you to create sort of smoky effects like these. And there are thousands and thousands upon thousands of these tools available for use. And some of them come with the program already. I'm quite fond of this pixel brush pen that I found, which will create little pixel clouds that look like this. They're pretty cool for use in effects, for example. And the store is full of all of these kinds of materials, as well as, this is something I'm not going to go into in this video, but the program also comes with a 3D model viewer. And you can download models like this for the 3D model viewer. And if you need a character to take a certain pose, and you don't know how to draw that pose from your head, you can load a 3D model up onto your canvas, and you can pose it, and you can make it move in the direction that you want, and you can use that as a reference. So you can essentially generate, without having to look at photo reference materials, you can generate your own reference materials by using the 3D tool in the program. I don't play around with that very much because it's sometimes it just feels a little too stiff for me, but it's an option that's available, and it's something that can be extremely helpful when you're doing complicated poses from complicated angles and in complicated settings. So that's the storefront. All of what's on there, as far as I know, is it's free, and you can use it for commercial purposes as well, but you should be a little bit careful, especially if you are using pre-rendered backgrounds, that you don't run into copyright trouble with the work that you create. So finally, the store is what I meant to write there. Finally, let's talk about fonts and text and bubbles. Because the final feature that this program has that makes it extremely useful for artists like me who create comics is it can do fantastic things with text. Here's a bit of text I put down. Now, standard feature that you'll see in most programs, I can resize the text to fit whatever I want, but the thing that makes this program particularly cool when it comes to these things is the ability to create speech bubbles, which is built into the program. I grab the curve balloon tool, draw some curves around, and I have got a speech bubble that I can adjust to be whatever size and shape I might like it. I can add additional control points to create really weird bubble shapes. And the program will automatically link the text together with the balloon that you put around it, which means if I move the balloon or I move the text, they will move together. Even better than that, though, let me show you this little trick. It can even link different bits of text together. As you can see, there's a little bounding box that surrounds all of the text I've got on screen right now. And that's because the program is considering both of these pieces of text to be on the same layer, essentially. Which means if I move the bubble and the text that I made previously, the other text will move around along with it. And if I create a bubble around this bit of text, and I grab that bubble, it will automatically link up with and overlap correctly with any other speech bubble on the same layer, which is fantastic. And I can also do stuff like grab the curve balloon tool and make a link between them, like so, and it too will automatically break the outline, and I can make it as thick or as narrow as I want. Absolutely no problem. And there are also tools like, for instance, the tail tool, which will create an instant and very easy balloon tail, either as just as a straight line or as a spline like this, so that you can create tails like this or tails like this. And this is it's fantastically convenient when it comes to creating speech bubbles. And you can also do different kinds of speech bubbles. For example, let's see. I can tell it to give a spraying effect to the outline, which will give me this kind of rough speech bubble thing going on, or I can use a different tool entirely to create speech bubbles. I'm going to have to alter the page color a little bit for this. To create a bubble that looks like... let's put that up a little bit. This. Let's resize that so it actually works. And as you can see, if I resize the bubble, the text will automatically try to stay in position within the bubble. It'll automatically try to keep its place in the bubble, so that it's very easy to drag things around and make them look good. And there are different kinds of bubbles. Again, this is something you can download on the storefront, where there are different kinds of bubbles that you can download that look different ways and have different effects attached to them. There's also this India ink balloon, which looks a lot better if I do it with pen pressure, where you can get a much more hand-drawn kind of look to your speech bubbles. But even these can also just be manipulated freely by use of the control points that come with the bubble. I've not really used the hand-drawn bubble tool a little bit because I find it a little bit wonky, but mostly just really kind of cool. And yeah, that's some of the stuff that you can do with the bubble tool. Now, fonts, it also has a special feature for that, because I have 332 fonts on my system, which is quite a lot. And they have a ton of different names and a ton of different configurations. Some of them are good for dialogue. Some of them are good for making effects. Some of it is good for making designs, like on signs and buildings, or text on a piece of paper in the comic. In Photoshop, I just kind of have to search through this list manually in order to find what I need. But in this program, I can create special lists of fonts. For instance, this is my design font list, which has all the kind of weird and wacky fonts that I need to create different types of specialized dialogue, or, you know, if something needs to look menacing like this. I keep all of those fonts in my design font folder, and I have a folder specifically for dialogue fonts, fonts that are good for just having characters talking to each other, and one for effects, like for instance this one called shock therapy, which is good for electrocution and stuff like that. And I can keep all of that stuff organized as meticulously as I like in different folders, and just keep everything easily findable when I draw and when I'm trying to do comic pages and comic panels. Now, the one disadvantage Clip Studio has compared to Photoshop is that Photoshop can manipulate text vectors better. Which is to say, in Photoshop, I would be able to add an effect to this text that says, okay, curve this text, or blow it up, or make it bulge, or make it look weird, or make it look different. I can't do that in this program. I can really only make the text bigger or make it smaller. I can't alter the direction or alter the shape any other than just this. I can do a few things with making the text appear closer together or stretching it a little bit, but the tools are rather limited for exactly what you can do in this tool. In order to freely manipulate the look of text, I have to rasterize the layer. And once I do that, that's when I can start messing around with how the text is displayed. But unfortunately, because it is rasterized, if I stretch it too much, as you can see, it starts to get blurry, and it starts to look worse, and it starts to not look so good. Where Photoshop has some features where you can stretch text really far, and it'll still be a vector shape, and it won't look blurry and ugly like this. And that's the one disadvantage, really, I feel, that this program has compared to something like Photoshop. It's not quite as versatile at manipulating text. So, that's a basic overview of some of the reasons why I like Clip Studio Paint a lot, why I like to recommend it to people, why I like to talk about it, because it just has been phenomenally useful for me when I create the comics that hopefully will one day become my living. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope some of what I said was useful. I hope you'll recommend this video to other people who are looking for a good art program for their comics work. And if you have any questions about the program, if you have any questions about what you can do in it or how to use it, you can leave those down in the comments below, and I'll try to answer them as best I can. Otherwise, you can leave a like or a subscription, and Smith Micro, please sponsor my videos. I'd like to talk about this program and get paid for it. And my name has been TB Skyn, and I shall see you in the next video.